be on LinkedIn Live. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all here. We're going to give everyone a minute or so just to join us and give Daren a chance to settle in and get comfy, and then we'll make a start.
Sounds good.
It's always good to be comfy, right? Just checking all the technicals, making sure everything is as it needs to be. Yeah, I can see we are on the stream, so that's good. We've got some guests with us already, which is all good. Hey, Vlaine. Hey, Babola. Good to see you. Okay. Right. I'll just make it so that I can see any comments as they come in, any questions, and then we'll make a start, I think. Awesome. Okay. We'll call it there. Hi, everyone. Great to be along for another Community Fabric. Well, what do we call these things? Conversations, podcast recordings, live streams, whatever you want to call it. We're here on LinkedIn Live chatting with someone who, let's face it, I'm sorry, mate, I'm going to have to say it, a bit of a legend in the networking space. Daren, Lightfoot, do you want to give us a quick intro, Daren? Great to see you.
Hey, you're too kind, Daren. As many of you know, my name is Daren Lightfoot. I'm a cloud networking developer advocate here at AWS. I'm passionate about networking, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you, my friend. And I'm sure, as you say, loads of people know who you are and have followed your journey, I suppose, because it's been fascinating watching you sort of grow and go through all of this stuff in the public view as well. You know, you've put yourself out there from day one, right? And it's been really interesting watching all that happen. As a networking old guy myself, you know, it's brilliant to see, because you've really been a breath of fresh air, and watching you and the way you engage with an audience and show people what's possible, you know, has been a real inspiration, I think. Would you mind giving us a little bit of a background about your networking side of things? Because obviously that's where this started, right?
Yes. So my background, well, I'm an Air Force veteran, and that's kind of how I got started in networking in the Air Force. But during that time, I kind of dabbled in different areas in tech, right? Until I really landed in my passion, which is networking. And my first role was first official role was a network technician. And in that role, I think I supported about 40 different buildings, but it was a flat layer 2 network. So VTP everywhere, you know, version 2, version 3. It could be a nightmare some days, you know what I mean? And so I really learned a lot about, you know, layer 1, layer 2, and then kind of transitioning in that role. I set up a whole new environment, but this time I use layer 3 with EIGRP. And so that kind of just helped me, you know, on the transition to becoming a network engineer, getting my CCNA. And so after that role, I became a network engineer supporting a very large infrastructure, about 3,000 different locations.
Mm-hmm.
And that was...
Sorry, did you say 3,000?
3,000 different locations.
Wow, right, okay.
But this is the thing. In that role, right, we had some traditional networking, but we also had some locations that were still T1. You know, T1, T3, depending on how DS3, how we had the network design, so I had to do a lot of migrations in that role, and that's what kind of introduced me to network automation. You know, if you have to support infrastructure at that scale, you know, you may not have the man hours or woman hours, you know, to support the infrastructure as need be. And so automation is going to have to play a role in that. And so that's kind of how I got started down this journey in the transitioning into network automation. And I'll just stop there.
No, I mean, and this is the point, I suppose. We followed you through a lot of that process, the learning that you went through in order to get there, and so on and so forth. And I know you've mentioned before that the CCNA kind of changed the way that you approach your career, really, and really developed as a man working in tech, right? It was important to you, that important to you.
Right.
I mean, obviously, you're not now working in pure networking, and I'm really interested in this transition, because you've talked already about the fact that you've got this, you're rooted in the classic networking, that you then started looking into the automation piece and focusing on that, and I guess really seeing the benefits of it and understanding why you would need to focus on it, particularly when you're talking about that sort of level of scale. How did you go from there to where you are now?
That transition kind of was like it all was kind of lined up. So before I took the role where I supported 3,000 sites, I was a system administrator. And so in that role, we migrated from Windows Exchange to Windows 365.
Right.
Right. So that was my first kind of experience with the cloud.
Right.
And then we had this, one of our large scales applications, where we started beginning to plan to break that down to a microservice so it could be faster, scalable, and more reliable, right? Because if one piece of that monolith breaks, you know, the whole application is down. So
Sure.
we started rethinking how we would deliver this application. And in that process, the cloud just kept coming up. So there's sprinkles of curiosity, you know, 6 years ago. Right. And as I transition to different roles, I'm often standing up VPNs that connect to the cloud, right? And I'm wondering, okay, what's on the other end?
Yeah, exactly that, isn't it? It's like that gap, isn't it? I know
Yes.
that I'm connecting to the cloud.
Yes.
What is that thing?
What is that thing? Exactly. So that, like I said, sprinkle of curiosity just kept happening throughout my network engineering career. And so before I joined Cisco in 2020, I was really heavy into network automation. And so I started using more APIs. I started leveraging Terraform. I started leveraging Docker containers and all these different toolings. And I'm standing up VPNs to the cloud, and I'm talking to these DevOps engineering teams, and I'm hearing about the application and things they're doing, and I'm just curious. But as a network engineer, it's kind of hard to step outside of just doing VPNs to the cloud because you may have a cloud engineering team that just focuses on the VPC side and the infrastructure side in the cloud, you know?
And to be fair, most organizations do have exactly that, don't they? Because they've come from a situation where those same people who are probably looking at cloud infrastructure now were the ones who were doing the on-prem infrastructure, servers, storage, all that good stuff in the on-prem data centers of old, right? So I think that's a really interesting point, that look, you've got these separate silos, right, looking after the different parts of the infrastructure.
And as well as, you know, it makes sense because you have different skill sets and different areas of focus on both teams, right? It's like having a security team. You have different areas of focus. And so what I started doing is just asking questions and looking at tickets that they're working on and just trying to be a part of the conversation and inserting myself where I can to learn what they're doing.
Right.
And, you know, that kind of led me to just continue being curious, but I didn't really make the transition until I got the opportunity here at AWS.
Sure. And of course, now that's opened a whole load of doors, right? I should imagine and certainly from the certification standpoint, it's a whole new world, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm someone that has always supported certifications, not because of the benefits that they add to your resume, not because they can help get you interviews, not because they can increase your salary, but because they give you a starting point to learn new skills. Like
Right.
they give you these guardrails to say, okay, here's what you need to learn in order to do this job role, right?
Yeah.
And so it
Yeah,
can
and
help you on that path.
it's the path, right? It's that thing, isn't it, of going, do you know what? If you want to reach a certain level of ability, a capability, I suppose, in a particular technology, then this is the path you need to go to get there. These are the fundamentals. These are the specific areas that you need to focus on. This is the depth you need to go into, and so on. And it just gives you all that structure, right? I'm completely with you on that one. I mean, that is a long running debate, obviously, about do you do certs, do you not? I think certs are great for that structure from a learning experience, right? Some better than others, but ultimately, that's if you've got the opportunity to use them uh, as the path, then follow that path by all means. I think it's it's a really valid point.
Well,
Sorry, go on.
one thing that I've always done is I focus on certs that are aligned with what I'm actually doing. I don't focus on
Yeah.
things that I'm not doing. And so that helps me, learn more in depth the things that I'm working on, as well as once I pass the cert, realize how much I don't know.
Yeah. That's right. So that was that was a joke from the old CCIE days, right? Was when you got your CCIE, the whole point was that you just found out what you didn't know, right? That was
Exactly.
the whole thing. And I
Yep.
think that's why certainly the mindset of of a lifelong learner is exactly that, isn't it? It's always like, right, I know this now, but think of all these things I've yet to find out, and I
Yep.
think that's super important. But you make a really important point there as well. It's not about what you're not doing, I suppose, is going chasing a cert in order to get into a particular technology.
Right.
What you're doing is supplementing your day-to-day role
Yeah.
and the knowledge that you've accrued through doing that with the certification process, right? So it's augmenting the process, the learning process, right, rather than trying to use it to take you somewhere new.
Right.
Really important point, because I think that can be a struggle for people, right? Is if you're switching to something new without having the context of what that new thing is. I think what you've described there, so many of those things ring true to me. The business of the cloud infrastructure team, knowing the cloud infrastructure but not understanding the connectivity, and then
Yeah.
the network team knowing the connectivity but not understanding the cloud infrastructure
Right. Right.
can lead to all kinds of problems, right? Because if one doesn't understand the other, how do you verify that they're actually doing the thing you expect them to? You can't, because one person doesn't know what the other thing should be doing, and I think you end up with information disappearing down a gap between the two, a skills gap or a documentation gap or just a knowledge gap, and that's the important thing for me to fill in. And I think why we need to get more network folk really appreciating and understanding what cloud means, right?
You know, you make a great point because if you start and in the cloud as a network engineer, as a cloud engineer, you kind of skip steps on
Mm,
building that foundation in networking. And I think as a network engineer, where you already understand layer one, you
right.
already understand layer two and how the everything is actually connected. And then once you get to the cloud, now you're just looking at overlays,
Yeah.
and you're just expanding on the things that you've already been doing with routing and different protocols.
Yeah. This is really interesting. I don't know if you know, we had the chance to chat with Jose Moreno from Azure a couple of months back, and CCIE, super clever guy. He's got loads of networking experience. Went to work for Microsoft, and he's gone through that same transition. And what he had to do was really almost create his own understanding of the networking aspects of the cloud in order to present it in a way that made sense to him, right?
Yes.
And I think this is the key, isn't it? what you just described there, understanding all the stuff that sits underneath is great, but you do get to that point in the cloud infrastructure where it's represented in a way that doesn't necessarily make immediate sense to the network engineer, right? And so it's being able to create that understanding of the overlay that makes sense to you as an individual based on your experience. And I think if you're right, I think if you've gone through that process of learning networking from the ground up, you're so much better prepared for that. So I think that's a really valid point. That's a good one. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So if you think about the from an automation aspect, obviously all of the work that you've done up to this stage, the tooling that you were using for your automation. I mean, what was, if you could zoom in and say these were the things I was using, what were you using?
There's a short list, but actually kind of a long list because the breadth of knowledge, that it kind of takes to put it all together.
Yeah.
But for me, I think learning Linux is like number one.
Just on that, actually, Verlaine, there's your answer to question number one, right? Linux is super important. Learn it. There we go. Go for it, mate. Sorry.
Linux is super important. I'm actually working on some content around like skills you need to learn right now. And so Linux is kind of at the top because when you think about software development, you think about the cloud, you think about IoT devices, you think about, you name it, a lot of the applications, front end and back end, databases, web apps, they're built and operated on in Linux, right? So that you as an engineer or developer is having a strong understanding in Linux is important.
Yeah.
The next thing is understanding version control. One of the biggest problems I face as a network engineer back in my day is device configuration.
Yeah.
Like version control amongst the teams. Somebody will create, okay, this is the source of truth of what everybody should be using to script routers and switches. This will get passed amongst the team. It's supposed to sit on a file server or something. Somebody edit it. They become different versions of copy. Which one is the real documentation or the real diagram? So understand the version control with GitHub. Like that's just important from a source of truth aspect in amongst your team. But as far as managing your code, same thing applies.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And in terms of the coding, just give me a flavor. What the sorts of tooling that you would have used, let's say pre-cloud. If you were automating an on-prem environment, what would you have used?
The tool that I saw with, and the tool I kind of stick with today, which I'm kind of looking at some others right now, but Python is the core, just because of how widely it's supported amongst the libraries, amongst the community. You can do a lot, and the flexibility that you have with Python.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people go through, particularly in the open source, people go through different tooling to try and get to the place where they're most comfortable. They'll look at the Ansibles. They'll probably have looked at some stage at Puppet and Chef and all of the kind of orchestration rather than programmability, because it's about getting to a point where you're comfortable with being able to achieve something with the minimum possible outlay of or expenditure of resource, right? So to be able to go, I just need something to do something, but then you very quickly get to a point, I think, where actually that flexibility becomes more important,
right? And
often people just end up naturally in a Python, Nornia, not descending into that level, but having to go to that level of detail.
Looking back, I took the long road. If I was starting over, I probably would have started with Ansible because it's more declarative rather than Python is more imperative. So you got to tell Python not only what you want it to do, but actually how to do it. Right. All the code for that. But in something like Ansible or Terraform, you just declare or define in the configuration what you want it to do, and it does everything that it's supposed to do on its own. You don't have to tell it the steps to do it.
So you just slipped something in there. You mentioned the magic word Terraform, right? Which again, in that traditional network automation sense, people don't tend to talk about Terraform a lot.
Right.
Only once the cloud door has opened, right? Primarily because it was used as a way of building cloud infrastructure, right? Initially. Do you want to just fill us in a little bit more on that? Is there anything more to say, or?
Yeah, uh, man, we can go on and on
Yeah,
about this,
yeah,
but
yeah.
the first time I started using Terraform was when I
Yeah,
got introduced to ACI.
right.
I started using
Oh,
ACI. We started
interesting.
automating to ACI, and
Yeah,
then I was like, you know what? Let me try out this Terraform because somebody on the DevOps team had mentioned it to me, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. I started building subnets, building bridge domains, all of this inside of ACI with Terraform. It's an infrastructure as code tool, so your
right,
infrastructure is entirely in code. When you're automating to the cloud, now you know exactly what your VPCs that you have in the cloud, the EC2 instances that you have in the cloud. All of this is defined in a configuration or a state file that you can then lock. So if anybody tries to automate any changes that go against the state that you already have locked, they won't be allowed to automate those
right.
changes through Terraform. You have a lot of capability in this.
So just help me a little bit there. So what you're saying is you're able to create an abstraction, I guess, of the state, the end state that you're looking for in your infrastructure, whether that's on-prem or off or cloud. Is that fair? I mean, I
Yes,
guess you talked about ACI, right? So that's on-prem.
it's cloud and
Um,
on-prem. So
right.
underneath, when we start talking about Terraform,
Hmm.
it uses API calls.
Yeah.
The concept of providers is only an API call. So it's
Okay.
communicating with the API. If there's a provider built, it communicates directly with the API of whatever platform that you want to communicate with. If you don't know what an API is, that's an application programming interface. Look at it as a middleman or a middlewoman between the platform that you want to automate
Yeah.
and then the code that you're pushing to the API. The API is what handles all of that traffic to get routed to, let's say, create an interface, shut down the interface. The API kind of handles all that.
Sure. So you can basically create these providers then for anything that handles an API. So I guess, like you say, ACI controller driven. Therefore, there's an API.
Right,
Cloud networks controller driven. So there's an API there.
right,
And I guess this is the thing, isn't it? I know that the cloud providers often have their own tooling that you can use to spin up and automate their own infrastructure. But
right,
Terraform, I guess, then is multi-vendor, it's kind of vendor agnostic tool for that purpose.
right. So you can use it in the cloud, and then you can also use it on-prem.
Yeah,
So that
and
makes it
multi cloud as well, I guess, right?
correct.
It doesn't care so long as you've got the right providers for Terraform. So
Right,
we kind of answered that question then, I guess, of what the difference would be between doing an on-prem automation and a cloud-based, because of the API-driven nature, because of this idea of creating this declarative view of what you want the infrastructure to look like, and so the provider, I guess, just makes that happen, right, based on the data that's sitting in the what would you call it, the inventory,
are you talking
or the
about the configuration
state.
file, the state file?
Extended state, yeah, yeah.
Right, the configuration file,
Right. Okay.
configuration file, the
Okay.
code.
So
Right? Then it creates that state file once it once you Terraform apply, you got to see.
kind of right. Okay. So kind of renders the state and
Right.
then pushes it through the API. Right. Okay. So are there ways of dealing with traditional networking infrastructure with Terraform as well? Would you be able to let's say you had a, I don't know, Cisco Nexus data center as well, and you wanted to push stuff not through ACI but through command line. is there a way of doing that with Terraform that you know, or?
I would have to check on providers. That part,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. For something
Okay.
like that, I would either use Ansible or Python
Right.
for your traditional.
I guess what I'm getting at is then that, because obviously the next things, as we know,
Right.
not everyone is going completely 100% cloud, right? That's that we kind of started down that path, and I think people realize quite, how expensive it might be, but also how restrictive that would also be.
Right.
So now that hybrid approach of having some on-prem, so mostly cloud-based, potentially multi-cloud, seems to be the way that people are driving. So it's I guess it's ultimately what you want to be able to do is automate that as one, really, isn't it? And kind of create that service of
So
multi-cloud. Sorry, go on.
I can give you like a great use case.
Go for it.
In one of my roles, we had like ACI, which is API driven. So all of the data that you return or request from ACI is going to be structured in JSON.
Right.
But if you're dealing with SSH, that data is not structured. You're going to have to parse that data with like regular expressions. And so what we did was we built a NoSQL Mongo database, use our used like NetMeeker or something to gather that data, parse it the way we want, put it in MongoDB, and now you have your entire inventory, interface information, route table information, ACLs, you name it, you can put it in a database. And now since Mongo actually allows an API that comes back structured in JSON, you query Mongo to get the information that you want from your devices. And rather than having all of your network engineers query devices, try to parse these devices, they just talk to the Mongo database to get the information to say, okay, what is the BGP information for this device, etc.
So would that then, you'd have a provider for Terraform for Mongo, right? Is that how that might work?
You could build it yourself.
Right. Yeah. Again, I'm just trying to piece the thing together, really, to understand it. And obviously, we're pushing Terraform as a particular thing because that's the experience you've had. Are there any other tools that are similar or have a that you could also use?
So we have CloudFormation at AWS, which is, if you're building on AWS, CloudFormation allows you to create stacks to build out your infrastructure. But a great thing about using CloudFormation when we start talking about hybrid networking is the AWS Solutions Library. A big thing in software development is don't repeat yourself.
Yeah, obviously.
Right, and the same thing applies to solutions in code. If there's an idea that you have, there may be already a library created that does exactly what you needed to do, rather than you trying to write the code yourself. So the same thing applies to your infrastructure. There may be someone that already configured the infrastructure exactly what you want your infrastructure configured. And so at this point, you check the AWS Solution Library to see if somebody else has created a CloudFormation template for that. Download the template, load up the stack, and now your infrastructure, you just do the configurations how you want it at that point.
I see. And that's, I guess, the beauty of an automation approach generally, isn't it? Is that you're able to template things, to share those templates, and to kind of works from a community basis, right? Because if you get the right community of people together who've done the things that you're interested in, then you're able to share that amongst the community as well. Yeah, awesome. Which of course leads us very neatly on, and unfortunately Andy, who wasn't able to join us today, but Andy of course has set up a little Slack group of exactly this, people who are doing cloud automation, right?
Yes.
Which is great. I don't know. Have you had much chance and opportunity to mill around in there and meet some of the folk?
I'm in and out. It's growing every day. Andy really passionate about cloud network automation, and he's done some great things internally and externally. I'm happy to be working for him and learning from him.
Yeah, really. Unfortunately, he's just too busy automating clouds for today, so he wasn't able to join us. But yeah, hoping we'll get him on again later. And what we'll do is we'll share links for the Slack group and everything with the notes for this, so that people are able to to join up, because it's it's a busy resource, and lots of interesting folk doing some really cool things in there. So I know I've spent a bit of time in there. I'm now thinking of all the opportunities that we've got for integrating IP Fabric APIs into this stuff, but that's just me. So this isn't a sales pitch at this point, so it's all good. I'm just checking. We've got a couple of questions which have come in, but I'm just checking. I think we've actually answered them along the way. We've talked about managing cloud networks from different vendors. So I guess, I mean, we've talked about. I mentioned AWS specifically, but with obviously Azure, Google, Alibaba, all of these are going to have providers in Terraform, right? That you're able to take advantage of. So that's all cool. And then the other question we've got was, do we? Interesting. So talking about using APIs to manage all the different multi-vendor networks, or if there's a kind of framework to abstract those. I don't know if there's anything there that you've stumbled across at all where it where you're able to, for example, create an object and then that same object is could be created in AWS or it could be created in Azure, but it's abstracted away. Is that, I guess,
Terraform, I believe, kind of does that.
Right. I guess that's exactly what I was thinking. Is that actually, from the way you've described it, that's pretty much it.
Once you have your providers, then at that point you can start building resources.
Right.
So you would just have different modules depending on what you want to deploy. So if you want to deploy a VPC, you create a module, or you find a module that's already created to deploy the VPC.
Right.
And as long as you have providers installed, at that point you just build your code however you want it.
Right, and it will just go ahead and build it wherever you want it to be built, right, with the credentials and the logins and the accounts and all that sort of good stuff, right? Yeah, no, that makes a great deal of sense. I think that pretty much answers the questions that I can see at the moment. But I guess, is there anything else that you would like to point out? I mean, you've already mentioned that you're looking to do some content, which is always a good thing, right? So because doing content is always good to see. But anything else that you'd like to sort of just mention?
I think it's important. One of the things we didn't talk about was testing. It's important to test your code. Test. There's testing frameworks like unit test in Python, PyTest in Python. There's PyATS. Testing is very important. And so when we start talking about automating, creating pipelines that have tests built in, that you can automate the end result or manually check the tests once they've have been run. Having those pipelines in place is a real key into a successful automated deployment in your infrastructure. So I got a couple resources I know from reInvent 2021, and I'll get these to you, Darren. There's a Net DevOps, a modern approach to AWS network deployments. That's a great talk. As well as Eric Cho, he has a LinkedIn learning course that he just released, DevOps for Network Engineers, where he talks about the entire process of Net DevOps, which I believe having a strong understanding of DevOps before you even talk about Net DevOps is important, and he kind of covers all of that. So those two resources will give you the big picture approach to how to apply automation in your organization.
That's perfect, and again, we'll pop those links in the notes after. But Eric's stuff always good. It's always good to hear what Eric's got to say, because he's definitely a man on a mission. So that's great stuff. I think, my friend, I'm looking at the time. I don't want to keep you too long, but it's great as always to talk. I guess the only question is, where can people get hold of you, Daren?
Well, thank you, Darren and IP Fabric, for having me on today. It's been awesome. Thank you to the community for joining us. You can contact me at LabEveryday on every platform, and Daren Lightfoot on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, mate. It's always good to talk, and we'll definitely talk again soon. And hopefully see you again. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.